afternoon, everyone. We're going to start the post-lunch session with a very important topic, and that's on strategies for self-motivation. So when we talk about self-motivation, oftentimes we kind of think, why and in what form and how you really do that. So the situations today around in our daily work life, the dynamic work environment throws a lot of complex situations, questions, our way of working changes. We at times, I see people sometimes go into spiral as a result of that. How do we kind of self-motivate ourselves? How do we take on challenges at the same time? Because sometimes, though we wish to, situations around us probably wouldn't change, but we still have to continue working towards achieving our goals and what we are set out for. With that, very interesting topic that we are referring to speak on that, we have Ms. Smriti Ahuja with us today. Smriti, thank you for being with us. To briefly tell you about Smriti, she is Global Head of Organization Effectiveness at Cognizant. She's a motivational speaker, and topics ranges from leadership to HR strategy. She is a certified NLP practitioner. Her vision is to have people get in touch with their full potential. Smriti, over to you. Probably a challenge in terms of post-lunch session, right? But I'm sure we all will really enjoy as she shares her thoughts and insights with us. Thank you, Smriti. Thank you. Over to you.
I think the session should have been post-lunch motivation strategies, right? This group seems to be motivated enough to attend. Can you hear me at the back? Can I request everybody to come up closer so that we can feel as though we are a little more interconnected? Thank you. This helps with my motivation because it makes the room look a little fuller. So thank you for motivating the speaker. Okay, as you're settling down, I didn't want this to be a theoretical session, but there will be a bit of a concept and some very practical tools to help with your motivation. I think where I want to begin starting this is, what is the concept of self? When we say that I want to keep myself motivated, what is that concept? And the reason it's important to think about that concept is because the Western construct of that concept is different from the Eastern construct. In the Western construct, the self is mind and body, right? So when you're motivating yourself, you're doing it with intention of propagating the well-being of your mind and body. And if you look at the therapy work, when people are either anxious or under stress, it's all connected with mind and body. The Eastern construct of self is very different. The Eastern sense of construct of self is the I. And of course, the question is, who's the I? If the I is not the mind, if the I is not the body, then who's the I? And the reason I want to talk about this just a little bit, and we'll connect it back, is because some of the core strategies for motivation, and especially not allowing your mind to overtake you, we won't have an option but to slowly follow a path of understanding the I. Whether that's through self-awareness, whether that's through breathing, whether that's through vipassana, whatever the case may be. Just to quickly explain the Eastern construct as simply as possible is, think of your mind as a blank canvas, right? So your mind is a blank canvas. Your 5 senses absorb the experience. They saw something. They don't give the judgment. They just given the information to the mind that there is a flower which is red in color. The mind takes that in, and let's say there has been a previous experience where you've had some association with a red color or a flower. You begin to label it good or bad. So the mind labels the experience. That part of the mind which is linked to self-identity is the ego. I'm an Indian, I'm a woman, I'm a mother of so many children, this is my qualification, That's where the ego comes in. And very clearly, when the self-identity piece is strong, we'll have more barriers, right? Whether it's intolerance, whether there is nationalistic barrier, whether there is racist barrier, whether there is a caste barrier, whether there is a gender barrier. So the identification of the mind with certain material things becomes your ego. Now, the question the audience may have is, so what is the difference between mind and intelligence? Right? Now, interestingly, in the Hindu construct, and not that I'm propagating Hinduism, I've read a lot and it appeals to me, so I'm sharing it. Of course, all of us have a different journey and different preferences. Your intelligence is the one which can discriminate good from bad from you. So, for example, you're a diabetic, you see a sweet, it's bad for you to eat, but you eat it all the same because it's going to give you a pleasurable experience. So the mind typically chases experiences of pleasure, or it rejects experiences of pain. I have to be in the gym for 2 hours, or I have to do a yoga for 2 hours, and it's too much of an effort. So my mind says, hey, this is too boring. Why don't you just sit back and watch a movie? So that's how the mind responds. Whereas what the intelligence would do, if your intelligence had a ruling over your mind, your intelligence would say, yes, this is, going to be pleasurable to eat, but this is not good for you. So the power of discrimination comes from what we call the buddhi. The power of discriminations come from intelligence. So finally, any strategy that you have to motivate yourself will actually be rooted in intelligence. Because intelligence gives you the power to discriminate. Intelligence will tell you that invest now for the long term. We know that motivation will dip up and down. So what are the tools you can use now, even when you're successful, to prepare yourself for the future? So just keep this construct a little bit in mind. And tomorrow, even as each one of you is facing it, and when I face it, I try and discriminate between my mind and my intelligence and have that inner dialogue. And not to say that intelligence wins every time. I can assure you mind wins many, many times more often than intelligence. But that awareness is created. So firstly, that is the construct of self. Like I said, that's the Eastern construct. The Western construct is self as, a combination, interface, and interactive experiences between the mind and body. Now, when we say motivation, there is a lot of popular literature on if you believe in yourself, you can do it. And does motivation really mean is just a function of the willpower and self-belief? And what I want to really share is that actually that's a myth. Self-belief and motivation would have some amount of a dependence, but just self-belief will not lead you to be motivated enough to do something. So what are the other constructs and constituents of motivation? What I wanted to, before I come to the other constructs, I wanted to share that there was a Stanford University professor by the name of Louis Turnman. In 1921, he started a study. And in that study, what he was he started off the study by he wanted to identify 1,000 brightest children in America. And his purpose of that study was that, the hypothesis at that time was that very bright people are maladjusted, they are not healthy, they have, they don't have multidimensional interests, they are purely academic. So there was this vision of a very maladjusted, high intelligence person. So he wanted to disprove that. So he started the study, and finally he ended up having about 1,500 people in the study. This is considered one of the longest studies because it started in 1929. Of course, the professor has passed away. It still continues every 4 or 5 years, the data gets refreshed. I think most of the members of the study had passed away by the early 2000. I don't know if there is, 1 or 2 still surviving. So he started off the study with saying, are intelligent people maladjusted and in poor health? And very quickly, in the first 4 or 5 years of the study, as his subjects grew up and he saw that health was not an issue, on an average, they were actually taller, they had multiplicity of interests, and they were certainly not unhealthy. So his hypothesis was disproved that, the The hypothesis of the society in general was disproved. But he got very intrigued with his study and he continued. And as he continued with the study, the most famous part of the study was the conclusion that while intelligence has a correlation with, some correlation with success, it is not perfectly correlated at all. And what he saw of his 1,500 subjects, some of them, yes, became famous. Remember, these were the most intelligent children of the 1920 USA. But most of them took very, very ordinary jobs. So these 1,500 children, a majority of them were clerks, they were typists, they were seamen. So there was no differentiation between the intelligence and the kind of work that the person finally took up. So the point it was coming to, that to think that I'm intelligent and hence my motivation is adequate, that intelligence is enough for me to achieve anything, is not true. For a motivation to get built, you would need all these four. And you know, you may say, what is the difference between commitment and desire? Aren't they both the same? A commitment can come from duty, right? My father has built a business company and I want to continue his legacy, I'm committed to it. My father wants me to continue in his legacy of a sports person, of a film person, of an engineer, I'm committed to it. You may have commitment, but you may not have desire. Is that possible? Right? Now imagine if you had both the desire and the commitment, how powerful your motivation gets. Because when you just have commitment and your desire, and I think one of the, without getting political, one of the most well-known visible was when Rajiv Gandhi was persuaded to get into politics, right? He at that time had no desire. But there was a big push, he struggled, and we've seen that in many, many well-known and visible families. So you start between commitment and desire. That is the biggest motivation that gets you going. And duty can be a very big motivation, but sometimes duty cannot outlast desire and personal needs. And then, of course, incentives and challenges change that. So you've jumped into something because you have a commitment and desire for it. But the incentives, what you get back from it, is not adequate enough, or the challenges are too high. It's very difficult, it's conflict-ridden, there could be violence in it, it makes you stay away from your family, whatever the challenges you identify yourself, and then that dips your motivation again. So, before we get into how do I want to motivate myself, I think first it's more important to understand what that motivation is and whom are you trying to motivate. And that's why it was important to share that it's the intelligence we are trying to influence to work on our mind to build those motivation strategies. So the strategies on self-motivation is not so much about half glass, half full or half empty. It's really about the fact that the glass can be refilled. And that's such a nice perspective because usually in every conversation you have, oh, you see the glass half full or half empty. And then there was this, smart person who said, why should I even interpret it that way? What is important is that I can refill the glass, and which is what we are wanting to do through our strategies on motivation. Now, before we go on that strategy, one of the, one story I wanted to share. So there is this king who's passing by one of his kingdom principalities. And over there, he meets another rich man who has these beautiful parrots. And the king is very fascinated with the parrots. The parrots the colors are beautiful, and it's a pair. The colors are beautiful. They interact with each other in a very interesting manner. They pick up whatever the conversation is between the king and this, other, principality head. So the person sees that the king is very intrigued by the parrots. So he says, maybe it's good for my career and for my little, my little town that I gift them to the king, because then he'll feel very sort of obliged because he likes them. He finds them very beautiful. So he gives them to the king. So the king gets them home and he says, these are precious, so I must get the right teacher to teach them so that, they continue to do whatever they were doing and they don't end up falling into either bad habits or losing their skills which they had. So he gets a trainer. One of the parrot flourishes. The parrot, learns new tricks, and this parrot will get up, fly, soar into the sky, and then come back and sit on the branch. The other parrot refuses to leave the branch. The parrot just won't fly. So the king is like saying, how do I solve for this? I wanted these parrots to flourish in my kingdom, but one has reacted one way and the other is just refusing to fly. So he gathers all the wise men in his kingdom and says, get me a solution to see how I can get this parrot to behave in the same way that the first parrot does. Not only to learn, but to feel the freedom. I don't want to cage them. He should feel free and should be able to fly. So all the wise men come up with many solutions. They try and implement all those solutions on the parrot, but guess what? The parrot does not even budge, does not even stir. And the king says, whoever finds me a solution, I'll make that person a rich man. It was always a rich man, never a rich woman, by the way. So anyway, he said, I'll make the person a rich man. So, the courtiers go hunting around in the hope that they'll get a cut from those riches, as continues in the modern day. They chance upon this farmer. They said, we've tried everything. Why don't we take this simple peasant? Maybe he'll do something for us. So let's try him. In any case, we've gone through all the wise men. So the king says, really? Seriously, you think he's going to give me a solution? But the courtier says, sir, why don't we just check him out? Because in any case, I'm sure the language check him out wasn't there at that time, but whatever language they used. So the king says, okay, so be it. The next they know, lo behold, the parrot is flying, it's soaring. And the king and everybody's puzzled, saying, what we couldn't solve, how has this ordinary man solved it? So the king calls the farmer and says, what tricks do you have up your sleeve? What tools do you have that you were able to solve this? So the farmer says, nothing. All I did was cut the branch the parrot was sitting on. Right? So the point of that story is, if we want different results, we obviously have to cut the habits we are sitting on. So to think that we'll continue the same way and we'll continue to get the same results, as you know, has been called as the height of foolishness and paradox. So before we get into strategies, if you're not willing to cut the branches we sit on, the strategies are going to be pretty useless. They're just going to be kind of a sentence that is read out. So let's talk about the strategies. If you look at it, the strategies could either be prevention or they could be recovery. It is either you prevent yourself from getting demotivated, or if you're demotivated, you find a way of recovering yourself. Let's look at the prevention strategies. Now, this seems very obvious, and this is what we've learned at the laps of our mothers and grandmothers and joint families, but in the urban living, this becomes a little, I would say, either not fully understood or a little bit corrupted. But if a Western study comes, then all of a sudden we all want to chase it. So I'm going to give you an example from a Western study, because that seems to be getting absorbed better than the Eastern wisdom that we already have. But it's not, I'm sorry, I don't mean to sort of say East versus West, but I'm just saying a lot of that knowledge exists within human beings instinctively, but we wait for scientific studies to validate that for us. So Harvard has done a study on happiness. Some of you may have gone through it. Much like Turnman's study, it's considered the longest, what they call the longitudinal study. They started that, I think, in the 1930s. And the study was to see that what makes a person happy. What are the behaviors that make a person happy? The study is still continuing. They have a fourth set of directors and researchers. You can get onto the YouTube and you'll get to see the study. So as they went through those, there were 724 men on the study. I think almost all of them have passed away, but now the study includes the spouses and the children. And when they looked at what made a person happy, and which happiness will lead to motivation, the thing that came right on top was the quality of relationships you have. Now, that can be a little bit of a contradiction, because in our daily lives, we are running so hard and so fast that we don't have time for them. And that is exactly that contradiction between mind and intelligence. So your mind is pursuing your immediate goal, but your intelligence is saying, even while you're doing that, stop, pause, and take out time to invest in something that's going to help you. So relationships was the top number one. Any relationship. The second one was the quality of relationships. And the third finding of the study was that the relationships, the quality of relationships have as much impact on your physical longevity as it does on your mental happiness. So the first prevention strategy for motivation to prevent it from dipping is, if you're surrounded by strong relationships around you, strong and meaningful relations around you, the likelihood that you will go through that dip or the intensity of the dip is going to be lesser. Because, either you will vent out, or you will speak, or you will get another perspective, and that's how, or you'll get a sense of support, or you'll hear of people who've gone through similar things. So that was the first of the lot. This is very obvious. It's like the BCP planning for an organization. The BCP planning, when we do the business continuity planning, what do? We create redundancies, right? So this is like creating a redundancy. Because what tends to happen is, when you're doing something for, let's say, 9 or 10 hours, what you're motivated to do, your mind starts identifying with that, and that becomes your identity. And now your ego is attached to the pursuit of those 10 hours. And if your interest is limited to those 10 hours, then any change in that, any change in the fortune of what you're pursuing is going to directly impact your well-being. But if you do a BCP planning of having literally what they call more eggs in the basket, then you are, in a way, creating a little bit of a shield for yourself. Because now your ego is not solely identifying only with that thing that you're pursuing, but your self-identity has not got broadened. It's got broadened, and which is why, we see that women tend to outlive men. And you will see enough data on this. When a man loses his wife, in all possibility, I think the averages are he may not last out more than 2 or 3 years, irrespective of the quality of the relationship of the marriage. But when a woman loses her husband, she can outlive him by good 6 to 8 years. And the reason for that is because of the kind of roles that society has thrust on a woman. It's not that she was more intelligent to broad-base her interests, but her roles are such that it already gets broad-based. Because now a working woman has a working woman role, and then she has a motherhood role, then she's a relationship keeper role, then she's a housekeeper role. Whereas a man has narrowed his roles to the detriment of his own well-being. It seems like women are doing more work, but they are actually improving their well-being by doing that. Because, study upon study will tell you that longevity and quality of life is associated with the amount of work that you do, not avoiding work. And social roles expect women to do more work. And that leads to longevity and mental health and, outliving. So broad basing of interest, whatever that may be, sport, music, reading, cooking, anything. And if there are no interests right now you can identify with, it could be, I know the latest one that have come, and it's a big rage in Japan, where they're taking those simple coloring books and people are coloring. I don't know whether you've read about that. So people are even taking an interest as simple as that, So it doesn't need to be grand. It needs to be just something that you can put your mind and take your mind away from. Good health. So I don't know, are there anybody in this room who've done Vipassana? You have. Right. So please add, when we get into question answers, I would love to hear your views. It was very interesting. Vipassana was an eye-opener for me, because in that philosophy, the body signals are as strong as the mind signals. In fact, that philosophy says your body has an integrity of its own. And when something is not going right or something is going right and there's some emotion in your mind, it's going to be represented in your body even before you detect it in your mind. So this mind-body connection, Vipassana has a very strong one. And if you go for it, what you'll experience is they will constantly tell you to look at to be alert to the physical experiences of your body as you're meditating. So this was one of the few that I have been through which did not say that, just focus on your mind. But in this one, focus on your body. So the mind-body connection is very, very strongly established in that. And which is where this good health piece comes from. And of course, again, there are the Western studies which says that if you exercise, you release those happy hormones. When you release those happy hormones, then your ability to prevent a dip in your motivation is better. See, motivation, think about motivation, let's say it's like a a 100 rupee note. There are two ways to manage it. The rate of depletion. If you don't feel hungry, you don't need to buy a meal, then your 100 rupees is still with you. And the rate of replenishment, right? Now, these strategies are meant to reduce your rate of depletion. If you're not depleting it at the same rate as somebody else's who does not have broad-based interest, who does not have a good health, who doesn't have a support system, that person is going to go through his, think of, like I said, motivation as a currency. He or she is going to go through the currency much faster. But if you have figured out these strategies which prevent the depletion, so firstly, your rate of depletion is much lesser. So you don't need to, like the rest of us, fill a black hole of, minus 50 or minus 60 or maybe even minus 100. So that's where these tools come in. Self-awareness we've spoken about one way or the other, because your mind-body connect or difference between intelligence and mind and ego is not going to happen without self-awareness. There are many tools on self-awareness. Breathing, of course, is the most popular of them. There are enough resources available on the net. Like I said, like a far-thinking person, you need to invest in the tools today to be able to manage your motivation tomorrow. And finally, let's assume I'm in the midst of a terrible, bad motivation attack or a depletion of motivation attack. What do I need to do? The first principle of something which is not going right is to do the opposite of what you were doing. Remember, we talked about if you continue to do the same thing, you'll continue to get the same results. So if you have been going fast, you have to go much slower. You have to become deliberate when you're in the process of recovering. It's almost like if you have a physical injury, what will the doctor say? If you've injured your leg, walk slowly. It's exactly the same principle that applies when you are in an emotional recovery. A low motivation is nothing but you're trying to recover emotionally. So if you are walking too fast, go slow. If you've been walking too slow, by walking, it's a metaphorical term, if you've been chasing something too fast, then you need to get very, very deliberate about it. Make your calendar much, much narrower. Only 2 things in a day versus the 10 that you were trying to accomplish. And silence versus speech. Look at the balance between the two. So whatever it is that you have been doing, your self-awareness will help you assess that. And you begin looking at the opposite, because your strength and weakness are the same thing. So when does determination become determination and when does it become stubbornness? When is flexibility flexibility and when does it become indecision? So your strengths and weaknesses are exactly a part of the same coin. So just getting self-aware and being in silence will tell you how to move into the reverse mode of the same quality that you've been exhibiting. And that's the purpose of saying do the opposite. And really my last slide, is flexibility. Because when you're flexible, so let's say I have a date with somebody that, I have been wanting to date for a long time. We decide to go out for coffee. And he comes late for coffee. And while I'm waiting for him, my one way of thinking is, I've been pushing for this date, but he doesn't like me, right? So my perception is one. My other perception is maybe he's genuinely stuck, right? Now, based on how I accept or perceive the situation, my response is going to be entirely different. So what flexibility means is that if you've been perceiving the situation in one way, and it's leading to certain kind of emotions within you, then you need to begin thinking on how you are looking at it, and you could look at it a very different way. And the absence of flexibility leads to the stereotypes, it leads to the biases, and it again leads to the intolerance piece of it. So just 2 very simple ones on recovery, working on flexibility, and there are again 3 steps to flexibility, which is accept the situation, reevaluate the situation, and for that you may have to let go of some conditioning. Because you've always read the situation in a particular way as a function of your previous experiences. But now as you're letting go, you have to let go of that old paradigm. There again, self-awareness becomes very, very critical. So I'm just going to open it up for a couple of questions. I know we are running out of time. If there are any observations, from people in the room, that'll be great to hear.
Any quick questions anyone has? Please.
What do you think, why we rank 133 in the global happiness index?
Why do we rank 133 in
33 in Global
I
Happiness
need to
Index.
I need to reappraise this. I haven't applied my mind to it, but right, right, right. Why are we still unhappy? Okay, so going back to the Maslow's theory, a lot of you may be familiar, till you haven't met your basic needs, you can't get into your self-actualization and potential needs. And I think countries with low economic index, a high degree of poverty, will typically still be in the first two sub-segments of the Maslow pyramid. A lot of you are familiar with the Maslow pyramid? Right. So then, and which is why you can't get into the state of self-actualization and happiness, because the self-esteem needs and the physical needs and the biological security needs haven't been met. Right. Right.
But Bhutan has got the highest,
So-
happiness index in
Yeah.
Asia. And I was in Bhutan. Actually, you have to go and see how people are happy over there. And their economic index is much lower than India. So probably happiness sometimes doesn't come from economics. Maybe there is something else to it.
Thanks
Fair-
for
fair
that
point.
comment. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I have to kind of
Yeah,
come in
sure.
here. And many more questions can be taken offline.
Yeah.
Thank you, Smriti, for being here and
Thank
sharing
you.
your thoughts. I think prevention was great strategy that you shared. That reminds me of a book called The Essentialist, by the way. And it's a fantastic book which I have been recently reading, and I can correlate with what you have shared. So thank you so much. We have a memento for you, Smriti. And may I have Rajat please come over and help me with the memento. And Ranjanji, you also please come over. Please come over. आप भी आइए. Please come.
That's a good return on investment on 20 minutes, right? You get a memento at the end of it.
Please do the.
This is embarrassing now. I'm sure I do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.